Welcome to this episode of Level with Emily, featuring a conversation with composer Sander van Zanten. Sander is the audio director at Kerrigan Interactive in the Netherlands, and he has just done the music for two of their games. There are only two games so far. Deliver Us the Moon, which came out in 2018, and its follow-up, Deliver Us Mars, which just came out in April of this year, 2023. I played Deliver Us the Moon just recently because it recently came to console, I think, in 2022. So I played it on PlayStation, and I absolutely loved it. I loved the experience of playing this game. I loved the ending. I loved the story. I loved everything about it. And Sander says their games, they like to kind of challenge you about how life really isn't black and white. And so it's very difficult to pick a side. And I liked that challenge about it too. Deliver Us Mars, I'm maybe about halfway through, but love that game as well. The music in Deliver Us the Moon that Sander wrote is more somber and more ambient than what happens in Mars. Mars is a bigger game, more epic, so the music kind of follows that slight style change. But really just enjoyable, both of these games, and really enjoyed the soundtrack, and of course enjoyed talking to Sander about it. Join us on Discord to talk about this and other game soundtracks and audio and games, all the things. You'll find that link down in the show notes. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel and give us a like and some make sure you get your notifications. All of those things help us out a lot. And if you could support us financially, we would be so grateful. You can do that at patreon.com/level. One final note, an important one. We don't put music in these YouTube videos for many reasons. So if you want to hear the music, you got to listen to the audio version of the podcast. And I cannot encourage you to do that enough, just to hear these very specific, in some cases, music examples that Sander and I speak about. So anyway, you can find that wherever you get your podcasts. And I will now turn things over to Sander van Zanten talking about Deliver Us the Moon and Deliver Us Mars. Deliver Us the Moon came out in 2018, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Right? Yeah. But it came out on PS5 last year, 2022, which is how I played it for the first time. So to me, it was brand new, experience. And I loved every second of it. And I just think that game is so special, and your music is a huge part of that. So will you tell us, who you are and a little bit about Deliver Us the Moon, and we'll get to Mars eventually.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to start with. That's awesome to hear. We worked on that for quite a while. Came out in 2018 and had a release on PS5. Indeed, in 2022. Mm-hmm. And that introduced the game to a whole new audience, and that was very awesome. But yeah, to take a step back, my name is Sander, to take the Dutch pronunciation. And I am the audio director here at Kerrigan Interactive. Started out as a composer, got involved into too many different audio things, and now I try to juggle all these balls, which is a lot of fun in a team such as ours. Where we like to create big immersive experiences, but we're not a super huge team, so we kind of have to make do with what we have, and find all sorts of interesting solutions to tackle whatever creative problems arise from our ideas. Deliver Us the Moon, which is our debut game, actually, was all about being an astronaut. It was about capturing that feeling of being in space, being alone, and having that really, it's like a double-edged sword, where on one side it's a very beautiful place to be. It's a very serene place. It's very majestic, but on the other end, it also could kill you very fast, and it's super dangerous. Mm-hmm. And we try to walk the tightrope between these two things, trying to balance them out to find an experience that people hopefully find immersive and leaves them thinking for a while after finishing the game.
Mm-hmm, definitely. I think that the music really does a fine job of capturing that wonder and hope, and also loneliness and, danger at times. But mostly it's just kind of this especially in Deliver Us the Moon, there's a lot more melancholy, I feel, in that particular, well, because it's so D minor based, right? But it's like, it's like, there's still that just kind of that wonder, really, this like, oh my God, we're in space, and we're doing all these cool space things, but it's really scary, but Earth is depending on, I feel all that in the music, which there are so many different ways you could have gone musically, and to capture all of those emotions is, to me, very impressive.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It was definitely it was a quest for us to find this, and it's been quite a journey. And I'm very fortunate to have met Koen and Paul, the founders of the studio, at a very early stage. Okay. Before the game, well, I think the game was in its very first steps when I came to meet them, and a few months later they asked me to come aboard and give it my shot as a composer and sound designer. So I did that, but originally I initially started out as a fantasy orchestral music composer. That's what I was into at the time, and how I had taught myself to write and compose music. So I had to really change direction and learn all these new things, and what different instruments should I use here? How can I make sure that it's less whimsical, less fantasy-ish, and more captures the gravity of the situation and the atmosphere of the stars around you, the vacuum of space. It was quite an endeavor, but so interesting to find out, and I'm really fortunate to have gotten the opportunity to do so. Really grateful for that.
Yeah. And the game itself, as I was playing, I really am very spoiler averse. I don't like looking things up unless I am stuck or whatever. I don't like to read about a game while I'm playing it, and nothing like that. So going through all of that with Zelda right now. But it's it's like avoiding, it's impossible to avoid. But with Moon, which I think of it like, I'm like, there's Moon and there's Mars. We're going to talk about both, right? We're going to talk about Deliver Us the Moon, and we're going to talk about Deliver Us Mars. But with Moon and with Mars to a certain extent, although I didn't finish that yet. So, but with Moon, I definitely was fearful that kind of, what am I going to stumble across? Like, what am I going to discover here? And that was fun too, just being like, am I going to walk into a room full of scary creatures? Am I gonna come across a bunch of bodies? Which, it's just that was really fun in terms of the gameplay too.
Awesome. Yeah, it's they leave you so much in the dark, which was such a fun narrative and also game design decision to do. We felt like desolation, isolation, loneliness was the way for us to go here. So we intentionally decided to, let's not make it super clear what you're gonna find next. Even though it's a super linear story, and there aren't so many side quests or anything. It's a very linear experience. But even so, there are so many ways where you can just leave your audience in the dark about what's coming next, even though there are always subtle hints on the way, but still the very I think it's the last 2 or 3 levels, I enjoy how the mystery unfolds there, and how you slowly get to unravel the stuff that's going on there. So I'm glad that that also resonates with you as someone who played it. Yeah, big time. And I do want to try and keep it, even though it's been out for a while now, I'd love to keep the end spoiler free, just because I really want people to play it who haven't played it before, because I just loved the experience of it. But the end was, I just sobbed. It was so emotional for me. And I think the conclusion of that story of how everything wraps up at the end, I was just shocked that I was sobbing.
I was like, what is happening to me? It was like I'm like a 15-year-old with no control of my emotions suddenly. But I just I found the ending so emotional. So I mean, tell me a little bit about that if you could, without spoiling. And the music through that section is so gorgeous.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, that ending has a special place in my heart as well. The protagonist, your character, has gone through so much at that point, and there is a double mission for him there, and at the end he sort of accomplished both, and his journey could have taken a lot of different turns, but we felt like we want to continue the melancholic streak there that we had going on, and that also could have taken a couple of different turns, but it was a nice, elegant way to wrap things up in so many ways, like the gameplay, the cinematics, the way your character behaves near the end. It all comes together there. Like you've accomplished this super huge big thing that that means a lot to so many people back on Earth. But at the same time, you've accomplished something very personal, and something that was very special to you as the character that you were playing. And it was nice to see these two, to see the dual goal there reach their conclusion in a very beautiful manner. And beautiful doesn't necessarily mean it's the super happiest kind of ending, which is something I very much appreciate about the folks here at Kerrigan Interactive. There's, joy and happiness. They're super important, but also there's a place for sad stories, and I think that's a very beautiful thing that I hope we'll be able to keep doing.
Yeah. So, you mentioned that you kind of envisioned or established yourself or set yourself up to be this fantasy orchestral composer, or that's what your main interest was compositionally. So what was it like to write this music, which is all synthetic? I mean, I think that's maybe a sampled piano. I don't know for sure, but talk to me about what that was like for you musically.
Sure. Yeah. So originally, I think my initial inspirations, just as a composer in general, were the soundtrack to Fable by Russell Shaw, the amazing work on Guild Wars, and the Warcraft series. I think these are what drove me to game music in the first place. Before I realized there were so many other amazing kinds of music you can write there, and that if I put myself to it, maybe I can contribute a little to these too. When I started out, I knew that I would not have a big orchestra at my disposal, at least not for the first few projects, right? So I thought, okay, I gotta master MIDI. I'm gonna go and be the guy who makes MIDI sound like the best thing ever. Super duper hard, and I can't quite say that I pulled that off, but there are interesting textures, I think, that you can find in sample libraries if you use them appropriately, and that's always it. You never stop learning how to use them better, I think. So even between Moon and Mars, I like to think I'll learn a couple of things there, but. So when we realized, okay, fantasy music is probably not going to be the best kind of music for Deliver Us the Moon, we went back and looked at some of the inspirations, like the movie inspirations that we looked to when we were, designing the game as a whole. So visually and in terms of, what was going on in terms of story or level design. So we, all the cool sci-fi films like Interstellar, Gravity, Moon, 2001, they have they have very diverse soundtracks, but there are elements of majesty in all of them, and I think that word just kept resonating with all of us. Like, we wanted to be majestic but intimate, to emphasize like the huge vastness of space, but at the same time this very solitary experience that you are playing. And so we set out to experiment with a whole range of instruments before finally landing on a combination of I don't know how many sample libraries, but I think most of them were. Let me check. The piano. What was the piano? I think the piano was ATO's Steinway 1928 sample library.
Oh wow. Cool.
And the strings, I think most of them came from the Novo library made by Heaviosity.
Okay.
They have a lot of cool sample libraries. Also Forzo. I think that came out by the time we started developing the last level. So we put that to good use. A lot of crazy brass going on there.
Yeah.
And that was very exciting to get my hands on. It's like every time we start to release or develop something new, Heaviosity comes with this amazing new sample library.
Nice.
And I immediately jump on it, and I shouldn't. It's too expensive. But there's such amazing textures they have going on in there, and they just help so much. And in terms of reverb, I think I used a lot of RC48 back then.
Okay.
Especially like the wormhole preset. I use that one a lot, probably a little too much. But, learning curve.
Yeah.
Before switching to, I think Black Hole, it was for Deliver Us Mars. But back then it was RC48. I really liked that one. It had a very, I don't know, almost steely, metallic kind of vibe to it that worked well.
Yeah, definitely. And then... a lot of the music is very ambient, of course, because for a lot of the game, there are certain things that are timed, but you're kind of just moving through the environment and trying to solve problems. And so the music, just kind of supports that, right? But then there are definitely moments where you're like in the lead and you're like, okay, this is dangerous, like the monorail crash or something like that. So talk to me about those bigger, like more, boomier pieces that you got to stretch out a little more on.
Nice. Excellent question. These are sometimes some of the most fun pieces of music to work on, because that's where we can really play with interactivity, or at least dynamic music, where it changes depending on how far you've gone. And there's a bit shortly after you've actually arrived in space where there is a timed section, and it gets a little tense. But during playtests, we noted that some players are just faster than others, and we want everybody to have the same tense experience, so we couldn't really go for a linear piece of music. So instead, what we did is that we developed a spline-based system where we knew, like, okay, this is the point where you start, and this is where we need players to end for the game to register that this is, this is the goal. They reached it. They made it to the end. And based on where they were between the start and the end, we could translate that to a percentage, and that percentage would drive the music in terms of which layers would fade in. It wasn't the most super complicated, sophisticated manner of dynamic music, but it worked very well in that particular situation, where we just amp up the intensity of the instruments that are playing depending on how far you've gone.
Okay. Sure.
And we pulled that trick a couple of times throughout the game. But in addition to that, these were also the sections that allow me to bring in some more percussion. And percussion is mostly absent from the entire soundtrack.
Yeah.
But these are the parts where we thought, okay, let's bring in a driving, pulsing rhythm here to really drive things forward and towards a conclusion. And that was fun to work with. For sure. Yeah.
Oh, that's very cool. So, we'll come back to Moon, but let's jump into Mars right away, because one of the things I love is how Moon, and I don't have perfect pitch, so I just went to YouTube, typed in A440 and figured out that, Moon, I was like, D? Like, as soon as I heard the A, I was like, D? Interesting. And so, Moon is in like this D minor based situation for the most part. And then Mars is, you use a major third. So it's like a major, like Mixolydian flat six, technically, right? I mean, I think, yeah. So like, I loved that because I don't know. I nerd out about keys and stuff like that. So talk to me about those decisions, and then why you wanted Mars to be, it's just a more hopeful score, really, because of that major third, right? So, but the flat 7, you don't have leading tones all over the place. So it still has this, darker kind of, So, and you get the minor 4 all the time in there. And so talk to me about all that nerdy stuff. I just totally dug it. Yeah.
That is so cool that you picked up on that.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. So, okay. For Delivers the Moon, we set out to establish this very melancholic, sad, tragic adventure. Mm-hmm. And that worked out. And we thought, okay, let's take D minor, because that is, the quintessential melancholic chord. So we did that. But then for Mars, we realized, hang on, that's great. And we definitely want to keep, a very sad or melancholic tone to the music. But at the same time, we thought that actually needs contrast. Like all things, you need contrast in order to create meaning and significance. And that prompted us to experiment with starting off with a major third before switching. We're switching a lot between the D major there, but then also an inverted G minor chord.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of the tension comes from. But also the opening chord does start with a high C in there, so there's that 7th going on there, and then we can just play around with, moving from the 3rd up to the 5th, and then even I think it even moves up to a B flat while the C is still being held. So there's. I just love that we discovered more close harmonies, because we didn't really do that so much in Moon. But also inspired by some of the new sample libraries that we were using this time around, we felt very inspired to use some more denser chords, and especially the 7 chords are something that I've grown incredibly fond of. So I'll be using that a lot more.
Yeah, I absolutely loved that. Again, that hope and wonder really comes through with Mars, and that major third helps tremendously. So what was it like? And the soundtracks, you did not leave anything out on those sound. You put everything up there. So I think it's like 9 hours of music overall or something between the two games, or 8 or so. It's crazy. It's like 4 hours for Moon and 5.5 for Mars or something. Or what was it? What did it end up being?
Yeah, it's oh my gosh. Oh, one sec. I see my Cubase is crashing. I think I need to restart that.
Okay. Okay.
Or is it? It is not. Oh.
Okay.
But let me just briefly. Let me just stop the recording, save, and start a new one.
Sure.
I'm always scared for long recordings like this. One sec.
No problem at all. And again, I do have backup. Some of it, the static comes and goes. So, whatever. It's not a problem. Either way, people deal. It's fine.
All right. Nice. Okay. It did not crash. That's great. Okay. Nice. It's still running.
Beautiful.
Excellent. Okay.
Beautiful.
Awesome. The length of the soundtrack. So for Delivers the Moon, it's just under 4 hours, whereas Mars is just over 5 hours. And that basically covers pretty much the entire catalog of music that is in there, with a handful of exceptions left and right. But I always find myself looking for the things that are not included on the soundtrack whenever I'm looking for a game's music, because they're usually the big pieces, right, that are on the soundtrack. And I usually find myself in love with the smaller, the ambient pieces. That's what I find myself looking for. And then, I'll end up in a rabbit hole on YouTube where some random content creator thought, okay, I'm just going to go and stand here in this zone for an hour and record the music here. Which I'm super grateful for. But also I would love for these things to be more featured on soundtracks. Having said that, I think for our next games, we may want to curate them a little more, but then also include these on a more like a separate album, like it's the ambient album.
Yeah.
So you have a much more curated version, like the main soundtrack, and then in addition to that, there's, you know, if you're interested in that, you can also trace the entire journey of the game, if you're so inclined to do that through music again. On a separate album.
Yeah, that's what's fun about it, is you can get a good sense for kind of how long the gameplay is in a lot of ways, because there's not music running constantly, but you're like, oh yeah, that was. And I'm one of those slow gamers, so I couldn't even tell you how long it took me to finish Moon, because I just look at everything and it's absurd. So, but still, just such a great experience, and I agree with you that there are many examples where I'll go to a soundtrack and the music I'm looking for isn't on it for that very reason. Yeah. So yeah, I love that. Talk to me about the piano in Moon, deciding to use piano.
Piano is, well, first of all, it's an instrument I'm kind of comfortable playing with and getting ideas out of quickly. It was also a very practical instrument for us to use, as it's easy to drive MIDI samples with that. But beyond these practical considerations, it's also just an instrument I grew up playing in addition to guitar, but it's a little trickier to drive MIDI instruments with guitar. You can do it, and I want to get into that, but I haven't been able to do that quite yet. But other than that, it just has it seemed to fit the morose and serene atmosphere there, and it was just much easier to get ideas out because it was digital instantly, and in games such as the ones that we're making, iteration speed is king for us, because we're with we don't have a super large team, so we all need to divide our time between so many different things. And music is just one of the many things that we need to do and handle in terms of audio.
Right.
So sometimes there just isn't as much time for music as I would like there to be. So, so that means that the better and quicker we can get our ideas out, the more fruitful it probably is going to be. Yeah. Because also, if at the end of the day, you got to get your ideas out there, out of your head as quickly as possible before this ephemeral idea that you have, which sounds so brilliant in your head, just it just vanishes and it's gone. And it always and it happens so often at night, right? When you go to sleep and you're like, oh yeah, this is great, but I'll probably remember it in the morning.
All the time.
And then you don't. So,
yeah. All the time.
Yeah, so I just leave voice memos to myself now.
Perfect.
But also, it's I can't. There's just one melody I can do with my voice at the same time. So these textural things that you come up with in your head, these are a little trickier to get out. And so the piano just felt like the most practical instrument for us to get ideas out quickly with, other than it just being the instrument I was comfortable playing with, and it was just a very fitting sonic addition, or foundation, actually, I should say, to the soundtrack. It felt fitting.
Yeah. So, was piano your main instrument? What did you grow up playing?
So I grew up playing. I started out with a recorder. I think.
Okay. All right.
The flute. Me and all my brothers did, by the way. This was just part of the musical upbringing that our parents raised us with, which I'm very grateful for. But then I moved on to keyboard. Had a teacher that I couldn't quite connect with, and I was a naughty student back then. Did not practice super well at the time. And it wasn't until I started playing guitar with a different teacher that I really enjoyed or discovered a love for music. Okay. And that's how I also found my way back to the keyboard. I think it was through a synthesizer, actually, a Roland Gaia, what is it, SH01? It's a nice little, I think it's 3 or 4 octave synthesizer where you can just, it's not the most elaborate synthesizer, but you can get a lot of really crazy sounds out of that. Okay. And that was really awesome to work with. So that's how I found my way back to the keyboard. But then we didn't have a lot of physical space back when we were writing the Deliver Us the Moon soundtrack. So I think I ended up writing most of the soundtrack using a Korg nano key, which literally has just 2 octaves on there. So so that was tricky to do. Luckily, I have there's 61 keys here right now in the studio where we're at now. But back then, we were so scrappy back then. It was we were just starting out, baby steps, young studio, first game.
Yeah.
Korg nano key.
Amazing.
2 octaves. That's what you get. But it worked out.
That makes for good stories, though. Yep. Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's so fantastic. So how long have you been in this new space? It's beautiful. It looks beautiful, by the way.
Thanks. Yeah, this is an awesome new space. I think we moved in here back in October either 2020 or 2021. I think it's 2020, but time flies when there's COVID.
Yeah.
But I think, it's been 2.5 years now since we got here. And I'm very happy that we, this place already came with this room that I'm in right now. You can see it from the webcam, but there are some acoustic panels up there, and there's this acoustic material on the side as well.
Nice.
Which just came with the building. It was here already. We didn't have to do it ourselves. And there's plenty of extra stuff that we can do, and we want to set up some vocal recording booths here as well. So we have some dedicated recording spaces. But it is definitely a step up from the place where we used to be. That's for sure. Everybody has a much better space right now, and that just facilitates the creative process.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the other questions I had when we were talking about keyboard and, you with ephemeral thoughts kind of just going away in an instant or whatnot. There are some tracks, and let me see, I wrote down some titles here. Let me see if I can find them. There's this really lovely track on Mars called Home. And I love this track, and it has this very improvisatory sound to it. And I was curious how often you write in that manner, or if that was actually improvised. Just tell me about how that track was constructed.
Awesome, yeah. This is actually one of the few tracks where I could draw back on my my earlier fantasy inspirations, because I was reminded of this. I don't know if you played the original Fable 1. But there is a
little
track,
bit.
Maybe you remembered. It's back in Oakville, I believe, like the village where you grew up in.
Yeah, I played just maybe 12 or 15 hours on Xbox way back in the day. But yeah.
Well, then, it's been a while.
Yeah.
So, I don't imagine anyone to remember that track by now. But it's always stuck with me. It's called Summerfields, the track, and it's such a beautiful pastoral track, I would say, and that's the kind of vibe that I wanted to capture here. And it just called for a little bit of improvisation where you're not you can play around a little bit with the tempo, with the density of the piano melody there. It was definitely a piece of improvisation, and it seemed fitting. You're at the start of the game. Everything should feel a little warm and cozy, not super structured back then.
Yeah.
And there's, I believe, when you go down to the living room, you see the sun just over the horizon there, and it casts this beautiful light inside the living room there, and it just, it's these really warm summer memories there that we tried to capture there, and the improvisatory nature there seemed fitting.
Yeah.
And I think a lot more tracks were written in that sense where, at first I just got to fiddle around a bit. My process isn't structured in that sense that I write music out first. I don't start with notation or sheet music. I do quite the opposite. I try to let myself be inspired by both the in-game environment and also the sonic textures that we have, gathered in our little palette, which is the things we do. First when we just start out with a project, we try to gather, what sonic colors, what musical textures we feel like are appropriate for the project that we're making. So then when the project starts rolling and we gotta crank out a lot of music in a very short amount of time, we, in addition to our themes and motives, we also have a clear set of sounds that we want to play with. And once we have these things, we can just let go and be free and improvise to our heart's content. So long as the situation calls for it, of course.
Yeah.
For the more like tense sections, that's where it becomes a little trickier to improvise.
Yeah. So talk to me how you ended up working at the studio and how you met, because it sounds like others that you work with and for perhaps have a musical ear and interest musically in how the project should unfold. And I'm curious about that too.
Cool. So one of the founders, Paul, he originally started out as a composer himself as well.
Okay.
He still does it, but he is mostly active in the trailer scene. That's where he did most of his composition work professionally. And that, even though he isn't, how do I put this, too connected to, all the technical stuff that is involved with getting your game up and running, your music up and running in the game, the implementation side of things, he does have a very keen ear for music and what it can do to establish an atmosphere. And his brother, the other founder, Koen, is also very, how do I put this, attuned to sound. They both feel like it's a very important thing in establishing an experience, whether it's a movie or a film or a theater piece or whatever. And so they've always emphasized audio in the games that we make. So initially when I started, when I got to meet them, I think I just walked into their office one day when they hosted this public alpha event for a game they were making. And
fun.
I did some background research before I went there, and I saw, Paul does music as well. So they're not going to need me, and that's fine. I just want to go and see what they're up to, see what's going on. And we ended up connecting in a very awesome way. So we ended up talking all afternoon, and I think we both, the three of us, left each other with a very positive vibe. We resonated with each other. Things clicked, and at that point, I was just starting out as a composer as well, and I was just trying to be everywhere. So whatever game event or happening was going on in the country. The Netherlands is a super huge country, so I can be in one end of the country and travel to the other in like 3 hours. We're super tiny like that. So there was a time where I would just go to every event and just show up and be there, do the jams and whatnot, and just get to know people. But it was with Koen and Paul here at Keoken that something really clicked. And a couple months after our initial meeting, they sent me a message saying like, "Hey, you mentioned doing music," and I mentioned that very low key back then because I thought, they have a composer. I'm not gonna write music for them. I don't want to intrude on what they have going on already. But it turned out that they could use another composer on board there to help them create all the cool things that they want to create. Now for Mars, we managed to expand our audio team, and we brought an amazing audio designer on board, Bas Bertrand, who just did a phenomenal job in all things audio, and I can't wait to show more of his work. We're cooking up some new things, and he is much more involved with the music side of things for that, and I'm very excited to show that to the world once it's time. But for Mars, nice. We divided it a little more cleanly, where the music was mostly me, although I did play guitar on a couple of tracks on Mars. Yeah, sir, I think I'm rambling a bit. I hope that answered your question.
No, not at all. No, absolutely. No, that's great. I think that's so wonderful when, whoever's directing the game or coming up with the game or whatever is in tune to music in the right way.
Yeah.
Because I think we've all heard of nightmare stories where they think they know things about music, but yeah, no, that's a really wonderful thing. And you know, there are credit songs. Talk to me about the songs that are on both games, featuring, is it one of the voice actors, or tell us about those songs.
Oh, awesome! You bring that up. The credit songs, they are a collaboration with Nola Klopp. She's a super incredible voice actress, but also a singer. And we actually co-composed both of the credit songs when we were wrapping up these games, and they were such a nice way of bringing the games, or bringing both of these games to sort of a logical conclusion. So in the first credit song, she sings from the perspective of Sarah, who she also voiced in the first game, and it felt fitting to trace her path and transcribe it to music, so to speak. So there's a bit of an arc in there where she, I think she recounts her disappointment with the people who were in charge of making sure that everything was running smoothly on the moon, and also her disappointment in a person who I shall not name to avoid spoilers, but who plays, of course, a very pivotal role in the game. And for the second game, we wanted to pull off something similar, but here we felt there was a nice angle that we could use here. How do I put this without spoiling anything? Because you yourself haven't finished the game, right?
I haven't finished Mars yet.
Yeah.
No, It just came out, right? It came out in the beginning of the year. It came out in February, did it?
Yeah.
Yep.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's still very fresh. So I shouldn't spoil too much there. But she assumes the voice of another character who is on the short end of a stick near the end of the game. And she gets to recount her side of the story there, because I didn't really touch on this yet, but both Deliver Us the Moon and Deliver Us Mars are games where we try to experiment and play with moral ambiguity and the grayness of things. Like we try to be very careful about not saying this one side is obviously the good guys and the others, they're the bad ones. And we try to steer away from having people judge any or other party, because it's also it's a very interesting topic. Like, how are we going to approach space colonization, and at what cost? It's such an expensive endeavor, not just in terms of economic funds, but also just in the sheer amount of resources that are put into creating all these spacecrafts.
Yep.
The massive amounts of fuel that is being evaporated in just a moment's notice, trying to get such an enormous craft up in the air. And there's just, whenever we try to do something, there's also a lot of things we cannot do back here on Earth. And once we reach a point where we really are starting to run out of resources, how do we feel about that balance? Like, when is it still justified to really go out there in space? When do we feel like it's necessary, or when should we put our resources back here on Earth, make sure that things are going right here? So in both of these games, there's this mixed moral premise here. And in Deliver Us the Moon, it's more about, should we stay here on Earth or should we go? And in Mars, it's actually it's very similar, but there's a much more personal connection for the protagonist there, or not so much a more personal, but a different kind of connection there. It's more of a family connection that we're exploring there. But both of the games have a very morally gray character, which is what we try to emphasize then, to circle back to the credit song. Especially in the credit song from Mars, we want to speak a little more from the perspective of a side that might be considered the bad side, if we look at things from a more traditional manner, from the perspective that is not the player. So we try to capture that there. And Nolly just did an amazing job singing both of these tracks. She brings such emotion to these tracks and such musicality as well. I cannot emphasize how incredible her work is in both of these games.
Yeah, they're really great songs. What was it like to write a song? Like, is that something you do anyway or have done in your past?
It's honestly, it's challenging for me. I'm not used to writing songs. When I was younger, I used to play in a progressive rock band, and that's not where the usual classically structured songs come from. So we just did all sorts of weird stuff, which looking back didn't always make the most sense, but it was fun. And it's I find myself not gravitating towards traditional song structures, which makes it both interesting and challenging as well to tackle these things. Like a normal structuring for a song is not something I'm naturally inclined towards. So it's an interesting challenge to pick up on.
Yeah, cool. And then you mentioned that, now you have a little more help on the audio team, but did you do a lot of the sound design for Moon then and Mars, or how did that work?
Yeah, so for Moon, I'm very happy that we had quite some time. Even though our team was small, we had quite some time. And I was involved at a super early stage, so I could do a lot of prototyping and sound testing before the project really took off, which meant that we were kind of comfortable with the aesthetic direction that we had chosen at the time. So at that point, it was a lot of assets that just had to be made, and it was a lot of hard work for everybody in the team. A lot of late nights there. Which looking back we're not very proud of, but we were young and trying to prove ourselves and whatnot. There are some war stories there, but it was to get back to your question, for Deliver Us the Moon, it was mostly solo in terms of sound design, but of course when you're creating the audio for a game, so much is also dependent and intertwined with the actual implementation of things, and that is so important for determining the actual design of your sound. And especially in Mars, that came much more to the forefront, but also still in Deliver Us the Moon, I cannot overstate how important it was to closely collaborate with not just our programmers for setting up the systems, but also all of our level and audio or game designers to make sure that everything just fits in the right place and are hooked up to the right things. So in terms of like pure asset production, I did do that myself for Deliver Us the Moon, but it would be false to say that it is a solo person effort. It's it really takes a village to pull off any kind of game audio. And for Deliver Us Mars, I'm incredibly thankful for the amazing work that Buzz did for that game. He just brings so much energy and a different perspective on sound design as well, compared to what I did. So it was, we had a direction, we had our audio pillars set out and established, but fleshing these out into actual, or manifesting them into actual assets, that is where Buzz brought in a lot of fresh perspective and new methods of working. We came up with all sorts of new systems, also with our tech team, of course. Everybody had just learned so much over the course of the first game that we were now ready to step things up and elevate the quality in not just terms of the audio assets themselves, but also the implementation thereof. and we just keep doing that. So for the next game, we'll up things up even more.
Nice. Tell me about the Netherlands. I know that could take days and days, but I don't think it's too often that someone like me has the opportunity to speak to someone in the Netherlands. So it seems like, much like here in Minnesota, it's probably an absolutely beautiful time of year there right now. And just tell me a little about it, if you would.
Awesome. The Netherlands, if I would describe it in a single word, I think I would call it a haven or a sanctuary. It's I find myself incredibly lucky to have been born here, in terms of healthcare, prosperity, overall quality of life, education. There are just so many things that, even though we have a lot of things to nag about and complain about, so many things are going very well, and that just makes for a very awesome place to live. So what we lack in, I think, environmental diversity, because there is just a lot of flat land here. We're literally the Netherlands. We're below sea level for most of the country.
Wow.
What we lack in environmental diversity, I think we make up for in terms of quality of life and stability. I have never... Well, I mean, there are plenty of things to worry about, but overall the country is super stable, and that is, especially the last few years, have made me very aware of how special that is in the world.
Yeah.
So I'm very thankful about being here and being so closely connected to so many other different countries here as well. As we're so close to England, where a lot of things are happening. We're super close to Germany as well. I mean, you're on the other side of the world, but we have the facilities here to facilitate such a connection super easily. And there are just, well, I could go on about this for so long. There are so many things to complain about, for sure, but when you listen about the things that are complained about, it's usually things that you can only complain about because so many fundamental needs are already being met. And that's a very fortunate position to be in, and I'm very grateful for that. So it might not be the most exhilarating country to be in, but oh my gosh, it's so I think safety in terms of where you live and where you can retreat to when things are bad or when you're feeling down. I think that's a very special thing to have in a world that where so many things are still in need of being taken care of just by us as humanity. We got so many things to figure out still, and cure and prevent and stabilize. And there's this little place on the earth where we have a lot of things sort of figured out and going smoothly, and that's here. And I just so happen to have been born here. I feel like I won a couple of lotteries by being born here.
And at Keoken, you are working on more projects. I'm sure you can't talk about them, but can you give any insight as to what's happening for you these days?
Sure. Yeah. So the game is still fresh, Deliver Us Mars, which means that there is some post-launch support that we're still working on. I think there's some pretty cool stuff in the pipes for that. But other than that, we're also toying around with some other ideas, testing out something, throwing a lot of things to the wall, see what sticks. And for audio, that also means exploring a lot of different perspectives, new systems, new palettes, new sonic textures. We are exploring. So part of us is still very much involved in upkeeping Mars. And another part of us is looking ahead and trying out some new things. And I'm super excited to be able to share more about that in the years to come. There's a lot of cool stuff in the works, that I can say.
That's awesome. I love hearing that. Well, what more? There's so much music, and I feel like I've probably left out a few hundred questions. But is there anything about the music for Moon or Mars you want to make sure we talk about before? I'm sure we'll do this again someday, but before that time.
Right. Let me see. I'm always happy to talk about like the last level in Deliver Simoon. I think that music worked out the best.
Music is so gorgeous. Yeah. Absolutely.
And other than that, there's so much going on in Mars.
There's so much that happens.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's so much going on. I mean, we can keep going forever about this. Are there any particular subjects that you like to touch upon in your podcast, or is it anything goes? Yeah.
I mean, anything goes. But I guess between the two, when you knew that Mars was going to be the next project and this was going to happen, and I'm sure there was awareness of the scope being larger. Talk to me about how that affected the music between the projects.
Nice. That's a great question. So when we moved from Moon to Mars, a number of things changed. First of all, we had learned a thing or two about planning after finishing the first game, and we took these lessons to heart for the second game. Which meant for the soundtrack that we knew that we needed to do a lot of upfront work or front load a lot of the work. So we set out to establish a number of instrument or sounds, like the sonic palette that we talked about before, but also we also try to establish a more diverse array of themes or motifs. So whereas Deliver Simoon mostly revolves around the D minor chord, and we play around with that, in Deliver Us Mars, we have a couple of these progressions where the D major and the inverted G minor we talked about before, that one is more connected to Kathy. So whenever she has a moment where it revolves around her, she resolves to do something, or has a moment to herself. That's where that usually comes out. But the outward faction of people, they have their own palette of sounds. I think they also start off with the D major, or maybe they are the ones that do go back to D minor to immediately set the tone. So we just have a couple of different themes revolving around Kathy, around outward, around home or family. I think these were the most pivotal ones. So that's where we expanded on a little more. So there was just a step up in terms of production / planning, preparation, a bigger focus on a more diverse set of motifs to play with themes to play with, different sets of chords to fiddle around with. And that just helped us a lot, especially when we needed to do a lot of cinematic work, which was last year. I think literally a year from now I was working on the music for the cinematics. And we have 2 hours of cinematics,
wow.
which is a lot, and
yeah,
a lot more than I expected when we started out with the game. And it is only because we prepared so much and did so much work up front that we were able to get that all done, because it was just such a lot of work. Yeah. It's just a lot of work.
Yeah,
it's a lot of work, and so much different work as well. We did so much. We had a lot of performance capture this time around. We didn't have that in Deliver Simoon. Okay. Which meant that our cinematics, we could play around a lot more with silent action. So whereas in Deliver Simoon there is always music playing, in Deliver Us Mars we try to have some more moments of silence. And I must admit that goal did not work out as well as I had hoped in gameplay, because I did end up adding music pretty much everywhere. But especially in cinematics, that's where the performance of the actors who did such an amazing job, it calls for silence now and then. And that's where also sometimes we can bring in this really gnarly, distorted bass, which is something we did not use at all in Deliver Us the Moon. But here we have this in Mars, especially in a lot of the cinematics. Whenever there's some serious tension going on, we let this growling bass, which is really just a very simple sign, but then added with, I think it's Isotope Trash added to it. That really makes these... I just love the crispy feel of low distorted frequencies. It's just it's so delicious. So that in combination with these very lush chords, I just love playing around with that for the Mars soundtrack. I'm really excited to exploring how we evolve the sound for our next project. It's gonna be wild. Or
Jupiter?
Not. We don't know yet.
Just kidding. Yeah. Right. So do you write much music on your own time, or are you pretty much writing for work right now, or is there much music for music's sake?
Right. I used to do more music for music's sake, but I realized that the kind of music I want to make requires too much production in order to make it actually come to life. So while I do fiddle around quite a lot, but I don't really record and produce it and publish it. Not quite yet, although Bas and I are sometimes after work we just come together and we Bas is an amazing guitar player. And we keep thinking we should do like an Animal Crossing-ish album where the music is just super wholesome and it just has happy vibes, and sometimes that's really cool too. So
that'd be amazing.
You can't see it from the webcam, but there is we have a bunch of guitars here, but there's also this what's it called? It's like an accordion. But it's connected to this tube that you're supposed to blow through, but we lost the tube and now we need to blow directly into the keyboard to make the sounds come out. And it's a very uncomfortable way of playing, but it's fun. Yeah. Sometimes Bas and I we just jam around a little after work, and that is honestly a lot of fun. So I hope that maybe someday we joke around about it, but I think we might just make an Animal Crossing inspired a tiny little EP where it's just us noodling on guitar and broken accordion trying to make that work. Yeah. But other than that, there's just
please
so
let
many.
Me know.
I will. I can't wait to show more of Bas. The world needs more Bas. He's really a phenomenal audio creator. I want to show more. That's
awesome.
Bas.
I love it.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Sander, anything else you want to say before we go? I look forward to whatever's next,
Awesome. What is left to say? I think, if you're into hard sci-fi adventures, if you're into, the loneliness of space, solitary adventures, if you're into games where combat isn't important, there's zero combat in the game, in both of these games. It's not at all the focus of our games. If you're into stories where you're interested in exploring the moral ambiguity of, just life, because life isn't, it's not so black or white as some stories sometimes make it out to be. And if you're into exploring different avenues there and seeing what other perspectives, people can have with dire consequences sometimes, then I think both of these games are worth checking out. It's I think the team established a pretty awesome and dramatic set of adventures that isn't captured as much in mainstream games yet, I think. It's not the most unique game. I would not boast or try to pretend that it is that, but I think there is something to be said for these games that they narratively speaking, they bring an interesting dimension to a game story. There's a lot of moral quandaries to be explored there, and I think these can leave you thinking and talking about with other folks who are who have played the game for quite some time after you finish the game. We still get messages of people who are so torn between either perspective that is presented in the game, and that is just a very special thing. We think life isn't it's rarely black and white. It's rarely good or bad. There's just different people having different approaches to what they think is right and how they can do the best they can in order to do what's right for humanity, whatever that means, because that's what we're exploring, right? What does that even mean? What is best for humanity, and who gets to decide that?
Right.
And these are super interesting questions that that we were fortunate enough to be able to explore in these two games, and I'm very much looking forward to driving these to even more of a boiling point in future games. I think it's just very exciting to explore in different moral dimensions in games. So if you're into that, if you like games that are a little morally ambiguous, check it out. And also, if you like rockets, there are rockets and they're awesome. And it's space.
Yes, space and you get to drive them. You get to launch the ship. You launch the ships, which is so much fun. You're like, toggle this switch, rev this up. So much fun. And, speaking as a gamer who quite often gravitates towards first-person shooter type or, massive open-world adventure, although not as much these days, but I do like combat. And so the fact that these games have, grabbed me so much and grabbed my attention, and I think that all comes down to how much you personally and as a team nailed that vibe of that experience and the adventure. So I'm just so grateful for both of these games, and I've loved them. I can't wait to finish Mars either, but Zelda is in the way right now. And other things, of course. But I just look forward to finishing that experience, and I really hope people play these games because I know people have, but I just want more. Sure. I want more people to play these games and experience them because I also find them to be really special and wonderful. So yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. That means a lot to hear. Thank you so much.
Good. And one more thing before we go that I meant to ask you about earlier was, tell me a little bit about you as a gamer. Do you play now still? And, just your relationship with video games growing up and today.
Oh, nice. I think one of the first games I ever played is a game, the name of which I woefully can't remember, and has been a mystery for most of my life, but it left a mark on me. I think you were a wizard, and you were it was this MS-DOS-y or Windows 95-y side-scrolling game. You were a wizard, and there were these green dudes with long noses. My brothers and I used to call them cucumber noses, and I think that's how it all started. And from there, I think my journey went through RTS. I was a lot into the Dune games, Red Alert 2 I played a lot, but Warcraft 2 and 3, these ones really captivated me so much. And especially when Warcraft 3 launched with the world editor, where you could just make your own maps. So that's also, I think, where the first interest in game design or creating games was established.
Oh, cool.
And from there, I was drawn into the fantasy realm, where World of Warcraft and Guild Wars popped up, which is where I spent a lot of time in. At the same time, I played a lot of Xbox. Back when I was a teenager, I used to play a lot of Halo, different Halos, Gears of War. I was very much into that. Final Fantasy 13, I played a lot back then.
Okay.
Fable, which is what we talked about before. I really, really, really loved Fable, even though I couldn't really lose myself as much in the sequels, but still left very much a mark on me. And a couple years ago, I finally got a PlayStation. I grew up with mostly a PC and an Xbox.
Okay.
And only a few years ago, I finally got a PlayStation, and now I can't go back. So it was just a week ago that I reached Platinum in God of War Ragnarok.
Oh, nice.
I enjoyed that game so much.
Wow, nice.
Really enjoyed Ghost of Tsushima as well. I think there's a couple of games that I Platinum. Ghost of Tsushima is one of them. God of War Ragnarok.
So beautiful, yeah.
Almost got Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. But there was this last achievement that I couldn't do it, and that it got me so frustrated that I ended up not finishing it, unfortunately. But then there's also Hades, and there's Hearthstone. There are so many awesome games that I still find myself having to find a balance in, because there's just so much cool stuff coming out. I'm very excited about Atlas Fallen, which is coming out soon.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of cool stuff on the horizon that I'm interested in playing. Yeah, there just recently this awesome game based on Nordic folklore came out. Bramble, I think it was called.
Okay, I'll have to look into it.
It's it's a very atmospheric adventure with incredible music as well.
Oh, cool. Okay, I'm writing it down. Bramble?
Where Nola, who also worked on both Deliver Us the Moon and Deliver Us Mars, also plays a very important role. I think she plays or voices the narrator in that game.
Oh, nice. Nice.
And it just seems like a very awesome experience. So I can't wait to dive into that too.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh,
so plenty of stuff still on the horizon to play. And,
absolutely.
I haven't lost the interest or the spark in games.
Oh, good. I don't know if I ever will. Yeah.
Nice.
Well, Sander, thank you so much for all your time. I'm so glad we finally connected, and I just had such a wonderful time hearing your music and experiencing the games, and as I've said already, I look forward to whatever you guys are going to come up with next. I know it'll be great. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me and for your kind words. I and the team really appreciate it. It really,
awesome.
It means a lot to us.